Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about understanding versus being understood. And honestly, most of us are kind of self-centered, and we're often listening to others crafting our own ideas of what we're going to say, rather than truly understanding and listening to the other person. But when we can grow in the ability to first seek to understand others and then to be understood ourselves, it can really strengthen our personal and our professional relationships. It can really reduce conflicts and misunderstanding. It builds trust and emotional intelligence, grows our open-mindedness, and is really key in true leadership and teamwork. And this idea of first understanding and then being understood is habit number 5 in Steven Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I've been doing a series taking each of these habits and looking deeply at them because they were life-changing when I first discovered them and still life-guiding for me as I apply them in my life today. And just a little recap, the first habit of highly effective people is to be proactive, to take responsibility for our life and our actions rather than just reacting to external circumstances, and to focus my energy and my time in areas where I actually have influence and agency rather than in areas where I simply have concern. So to focus on my sphere of influence rather than my sphere of worry or concern. That in itself can weed out incredible amount of mental time and anxiety. The second habit is to begin with the end in mind, to define our personal vision and goals for our life, or even just our day, before taking action. To get where we want to go, we need to know where we're going. The third habit is to put first things first, to prioritize tasks and time based on what's really important to us rather than on urgency, to focus on what really matters to us. The fourth habit is to think win-win and seek mutually beneficial solutions in relationships and the interactions that we have with others. And so in this fifth habit, when we seek first to understand and then to be understood, we're practicing empathic listening and growing in true communication. Most people listen with the intent of how they're going to reply rather than to truly understand the other person. And when we practice true understanding, we're learning to shift our focus from just crafting a response to genuinely comprehending the speaker's perspective, their emotions, and their concern, growing in compassion and empathy, which are 2 of the ingredients of being a loving person. And they're key in emotional intelligence and maturity. And this is the 5th in my 8-part series on Steven Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so Steven Covey talks about the difference between empathic listening and autobiographical listening, which is probably what most of us do. And autobiographical listening, what I might call self-centered listening, is when we filter what we hear through our own experiences, our assumptions, and our own biases and perspective on the world. What we think is true or important, or what we've experienced, has an enormous impact on how we experience other people. So when we filter things through our own worldview, it can lead to really ineffective communication and a lot of misunderstandings. And so this kind of self-centered listening creates generally 4 unhelpful responses. And the first is that we judge or disapprove of the other person or what they're saying before we really understand their point of view. For example, someone might share a personal struggle and we think, that's not a big deal, or you're overreacting. Because from our perspective, that wouldn't be a big deal for us, but it is for them. The second thing a lot of us do with self-centered listening is to ask questions to satisfy our own curiosity or to direct the conversation where we want it to go, rather than to actually understand the other person more deeply. So instead of empathizing and really understanding the other person, we might ask questions like, well, why'd you do that? Again, not to really understand why they did that, but from this place of judgment and our own ideas of how things should be done. The third unhelpful thing we can do, and many, many parents do this with children, is to offer unsolicited solutions rather than just listening to the other person. And often people just want us to hear their feelings, be present with their experience, which is the emotional growth challenge. And instead of being present with the person or child's experience and offering them empathy or compassion, we try to offer them solutions to make their feelings go away, solve their problems, and play advisor rather than supporter. For example, somebody might be venting about a tough day at work, and we immediately say, well, you should just quit your job. And the fourth unhelpful thing we can do in this autobiographical or self-centered listening is to interpret or assume that we know what the other person means based on our own experience rather than what they're actually saying. For example, a partner wants to watch a show or a sports game rather than doing some household chores. And I can run that through my filter and think, oh, they don't care about me, when actually it's just their own preference of how they want to spend their time right now. When we're listening self-centeredly, we aren't truly understanding the other person. We're making everything about ourselves. So when we assume, based on our own worldview, how another person is thinking or feeling or what their motives are, rather than deeply understanding them as completely different from us, it can create a lot of misunderstandings, and we miss the opportunity for deeper communication and, again, real understanding of the unique concerns and feelings and even what's important to the other person. So 4 really practical antidotes to self-centered or autobiographical listening are to practice empathic listening, to focus entirely on the speaker without mentally preparing a response. I know for myself, I can notice that I'm thinking about what I want to say, and I can tell myself, let's not do that right now, and bring my focus back to really listening and feeling into the other person. And empathic listening can be a full body experience, not just listening to the words, but listening to how I feel in my body and noticing the other person's body language at the same time. The second antidote or action to grow in empathic listening is to ask clarifying questions. And when someone is interested, most people do really like to talk about themselves. So in general, don't use questions that begin with why. Why is frequently not a helpful question, but open-ended questions like, can you say more about that? Or to ask what or how questions, again, rather than why. Why tends to be judgmental or filtered through that worldview rather than open to true discovery and curiosity. I taught K-8 art for about 13 years, and we used to send a little worksheet home to the parents, teaching them how to talk to the children about their art. And these questions can be used really for any empathic listening or deepening conversation. And when people look at particularly children's art, one of the first things they'll say is, what is that? Not a great question, but this tell me more phrase. Tell me more about your use of color. I really like the way that this flows over here. What's happening in this area of your picture? And clarifying questions or deepening questions are different than probing questions. I can feel it when someone is probing me, that they just want some dirt, or they're justifying their own mental positions, as opposed to when someone is actively interested. And I use this active listening a lot in my therapy to help people go deeper. And it's related with the third antidote to self-centered listening, which is to paraphrase and reflect, to repeat back to people what they said in our own words to ensure that we understand correctly. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated because of X. Is that right? And then the clarifying or deepening question could be, what's frustrating about that for you? So empathic listening is about holding back our own assumptions about how we would feel or act if something happened or whatever the circumstance is, and really being present for the uniqueness of the other person. This can be particularly critical around difficult or challenging circumstances because everybody has their own response. And if we're in our self-centered worldview, we think everybody thinks or acts like us, and this causes a lot of misconceptions. And people don't think or feel like us. When my mother died, I was actually relieved because the bleeding stopped in that lifelong difficult relationship. Now, that might be socially inappropriate, but it was true. Now, I didn't share that fact with a lot of people because they wouldn't understand it, and it's not really their business, the deeper difficulties that I had with my poor little mother. But when people found out my mother died, overwhelmingly most people expressed to me how they would want someone to respond to them. And many of them were like, "I'm so sorry. This must be terrible for you." And depending on my mood, if someone said, "I'm so sorry," I might say, "Don't be." But again, that might be TMI or too much information for a lot of people. And so unless I actually had a relationship with them and felt like they wanted to really understand me, I would often just say, "Thank you." But everybody has a unique response to the circumstances of their life. And although they might be similar to us, they might not. And so it's important, and this is number 4 of the antidotes to self-centered listening, or the growth practices in selfless empathic listening, is to hold back on giving advice unless you are asked. And again, parents, this is a big one. Sometimes people just want to be heard rather than given solutions. In fact, most of the time, we just want to know people are there for us and with us as we all trudge the road of happy destiny together. When we can recognize and avoid this autobiographical listening, it really helps us build stronger relationships and communicate more effectively when we use these little practices of really empathic listening, asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what people say to be sure we're really hearing them, and holding back on our advice giving. We're communicating more effectively, we're having deeper and stronger relationships, and we're growing in love and compassion. So when we take time to truly understand others, it builds trust, we can resolve conflicts more effectively, and this approach really helps prevent misunderstandings and defensiveness in conversations. And so once I really understand, then I can express my thoughts clearly and respectfully. Another key vocabulary tip, besides reducing the use of why when we're talking to other people, is to increase the use of I statements. Speaking in I statements instead of you statements really promotes productive dialogue. And it allows us to express really different or disparate points of view without judgment and without creating defensiveness in the other person. Now, I can even talk about the other person, but if I do it in I statements, then I'm giving them space to have a different experience. So, for example, my partner wants to watch TV. I want to do some household chores. I could say, "You always watch TV. You never do anything around the house." Not a good idea. Also, ever and never, always, those kind of global words, take those out of your vocabulary when you're talking with other people too, because nothing is ever, never, and always. And if it is, there's a whole other issue happening. And when I speak in I statements, this has been life-changing, particularly in intimate relationships for me. I can say, "I would really like to do household chores today," which in itself can be challenging because I am taking responsibility for what I want and need. And then I can make room for the other person, hopefully also to speak in I statements. And they can say, "You know, I worked really hard all week and I love this team. This is a championship game and I really want to watch this game." "Oh, well, I love you and I want you to be happy. If we think win-win, would you be willing to help me with household chores after you watch the game?" "Yes, dear, that would work for me." Excellent. Let me go make some nachos. We can enjoy the game together and then do some household chores together as well. And everyone is happy on Super Bowl Sunday. So I encourage you to notice how you listen, to grow your empathic listening muscles before stating your own perspective using I statements. And I wish you growth and depth in your effective communication skills to build deeper, more compassionate, trusting, and loving relationships in all areas of your life. Thank you so much for listening. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.